James Cook is an associate professor of sociology at the University of Maine in Augusta, where he engages in research and teaching at the nexus of gender, social network analysis, social media, and community structure. Outside of academics, James has applied principles of community organizing while leading arts activists and community garden organizations. James is bisexual, queer, and on the intersex spectrum. So James, thank you so much for being here and for having this presentation ready for us. You can go ahead and take it whenever you're ready.
Great. And I saw 8 minutes, so I'm timing myself as well, and I'm going to make it small rather than try to fit too much in. Because I know a communications scholar who showed up with 120 slides for a 30-minute presentation didn't get the job. My name is James Cook. I work at UMA in Maine. It's an access organization, and I am bisexual, queer, and on the intersex spectrum. What I'd like to point out is the difference in the presentation that I'm offering compared to a lot of presentations today and a lot of research regarding bisexuality. A lot of the research that exists focuses on individuals, and understandably so. We think of sexuality as a trait held by an individual first, and we think of sexuality as biological. To the extent we think of something else, we think of thoughts that people have, which is psychological, which is also at least centered in the individual. And therefore, when we make that choice to study individuals, we focus on stories that the individuals tell and the sentiments and themes in the stories that they describe. But bisexuality is not just an individual trait. It is a community of individuals, and it's not the only community that there is. So one of the things that I'm trying to do is to identify a method for thinking about a community of bisexual individuals, certainly, but as a community, what individuals surround them, either through connections made by individuals or by overlapping memberships, and then to be able to look at what those consist of, what commonalities are, what clusters occur in this community neighborhood around bisexuality, and what the cultural implications of that might be. Particularly in this work, I'm looking at, and there we go, I'm gonna try to look at the chat as we go, great. I'm looking at Reddit, which is essentially taken from the 90s, all those bulletin board systems and discussion boards. It's a modern discussion board. And every discussion board is called a subreddit. I looked at the largest bisexual subreddit, which is r/bisexual, with 598,000 individuals. It's one of the top 1% in terms of size and participation. There's some advantages, ethically speaking. One of which is that this is public by default. And so people, when they go on Reddit, they know that the communication is public. And as they communicate publicly, the norm is that people use pseudonyms, and that in their profiles, there's no information that you can find that can connect an individual to some other identity unless they actively choose to make it so. So that means that when we're talking about sensitive issues, we're not doing an ethical violation. Also, we're able to look at large-scale communities and not just 6 people at a time, 12 people at a time, 11 people at a time. I'm using R software, which is a free analytical program that is also kind of cutting edge because it's what the statisticians use. Particularly, I'm using the package Reddit Extractor, which is a way to pull this public information into the form of a data set. So my research questions are, what are the communities surrounding this community called R bisexual? How are those communities themselves connected? And what does that pattern reflect substantively about bisexuality itself in its manifestations, the way it's experienced, the way it's seen? In doing so, I'm thinking of this bisexual community, R bisexual online, as an ego in an ego network, to use methods from social network analysis. There are different levels at which you can think about this. The first level, level 1, is where we think about, say, ego, which is that discussion board, and the discussion boards that are directly connected to it. In level 1.5, we think about the connections between those communities to which bisexual is connected. And then at level 2.0, we go further out in what's called a snowball, right? And we would think about the yet other communities that the bisexual community is connected to. What are they connected to? And what I'm about to show you are some results from level 2, and then level 1.5. What does that mean? It means something like this. This is from information taken in June of 2024 of this year. We start with, in the middle, you can see in the purple, there's a little diamond that says bisexual. That corresponds to one discussion board. There are 20 subreddit alters. That means other discussion boards that are linked to from the bisexual discussion board. And those are the large shapes here, not the small dots, but the large shapes with names. And you can see all of their names. So in this case, a link means that you're using r/something to create a link to another discussion board for various purposes, to say, oh, you might be interested in this, or there's a resource over there, or go away, you don't belong here, you belong there. Many reasons why, but these are the groups that the bisexual subreddit are connected to. And there are already some really fascinating patterns that you can find, even if you look only in that local neighborhood. So ignoring the small dots. I've thematized these in colors. So you have in purple, gender and sexuality discussion boards. In red, you've got non-monogamy. In green, you've got erotic content. In orange over there, you have a feminist discussion about men and females, which is the distinction between how people of different sexes and genders are referred. And then hole up, which is this rhetorical statement, which means you reference it when you're like, wait a second. You reference the board hole up there, which means you have to hold on and wait. So a few things to notice here. First of all, is that there are clusters of ideas and themes that surround the bisexual community that is talking about itself. These reflect different focal concerns, and those focal concerns tend to be tied to one another. Also, if we look outward from this set of 20 other boards that are connected to bisexual, there are a bunch of other ones that those boards in turn refer to. 522 of them represented in these dots. Now, some of these dots are light gray if they have a subject that's outside the domains of these 20. But notice that there's a lot of other boards that do have colors, and that the colors, not perfectly, tend to match up. Which means what? Which means there's something called homophily, which is a tendency towards sameness in connection between these discussion boards, which is how we think discussion happens on a large scale, and I'm seeing that here. This is a pattern that is happening under tens of thousands of posts with almost 120,000 comments, but because we're looking at it at the scale, not of an individual, but of a whole board, we're able to describe that in a comprehensible graph. I see I'm already past my 8 minutes, so I'm going to summarize very quickly. This is how it happens. We can also look at membership overlaps, who's in one group that is in another. Now I'm taking a look at level 1.5 here, but we're seeing something sort of similar, which is that patterning occurs according to different themes. The color codes are the same, but that non-monogamy and discussions of sexuality and gender tend to be a little more tightly connected here. We can then characterize that by the number of members of a subreddit. So we can see that even though Slutty Confessions has a lot of people on it, it's still more marginal in the conversation, meaning that the content is more important than just simply the sheer number of people there are. And then we can use the same graph information, but we can change the characterization of the board itself to describe something else about what's going on, which is how often do these posts actually use the word bisexual when they're engaged in some discussion? And not surprisingly, the bisexual ones do a fair amount. But notice that LGBT and polyamory and ethical non-monogamy to some extent do the same. So there's a distinction and an erosion of actual concern and thinking about the bisexual issue in this neighborhood of the board itself. So we can, oh, that was my reflexivity statement. I'm totally queer. But this is a way for us to sum up, to engage in thinking about focal concerns without having the privacy concerns that have been discussed so often today alone. And second, this is something that you could do yourself for free. So we're able to get a community pulse fairly quickly without a prohibitive cost. If I wanted to talk to 120,000 people, it would be very difficult to do, which is why we only tend to talk to a few. I hope that this is a contribution, and I look forward to discussion after this. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, James. Thank you for starting us off on such a strong foot. I'm sure you'll have lots of questions at the end of this. Okay, so now we'll move on to our second presenter. Let me just go grab my schedule again. Okay, so next up we have Carley Arnold, who is a ethnobotanist and a gaming nerd who lives in Western Washington. Raised in Texas, she earned a BA in feminist studies from Southwestern University and worked in Austin, Texas's local government, advocating for more equitable ecological practices and outdoor experiences. During the pandemic, she moved to the UK to earn her MSc in ethnobotany from the University of Kent, focusing on queer folks' interactions with plants and landscapes in video games. Drawing upon her academic and life experience, she is now looking for a location to create a BIPLUS therapy garden and community center in Western Washington. So welcome, Carley, and you can take the floor whenever you're ready.
Hi, okay, thank you. And I want to thank everybody who's organized this conference for creating this space for us to all share knowledge. Thank you for the introduction. In grad school, I studied folks, queer gamers in Texas, where I'm from, and how queer gamers in Texas were getting access to plant information and landscape and ideas about nature, and kind of creating their own world through video games, whereas traditional kind of access pathways to knowledge were not readily accessible. And after I graduated, I was like, I really want to try to bring some of those digital lessons and successes in community building online into physical spaces so that isolation physically is not so severe, and bring some of the therapeutic benefits that are kind of more widely for a wider audience or wider population of folks documented for people who are experiencing the outdoors. So I wanted to kind of bring those in together into a therapy garden, generally for queer folks. And the more I did research, the more I thought, I think I'm actually talking about fellow bi folks, bi plus folks specifically. So it really became a question of what do I moved to the state of Washington, and what do the folks in Washington and this new place that I'm in, what are bi plus folks really talking about as a need here in the state? And the Goldson Institute released a study in November of 2020 talking about LGBTQ folks in the state of Washington. And bi folks overwhelmingly named mental health therapy and having third spaces for recreation and kind of social programming as their top two concerns for services they wanted to see to fix more kind of widely documented healthcare issues that we're having. So I've listed those two here. The following four that I've listed here are things that as an ethnobotanist, I kind of looked at a whole bunch of different research about bi folks and just took a specific lens to and thought, okay, we are lacking outdoor spaces specifically. We're lacking all spaces, right, in Washington, but outdoor spaces, there's not a clear even kind of hour or two for us to go to that are just for us to gather. And I think that really ends up translating into a lack of education that is bi-specific about ourselves in the way that we relate to our environments. And without having kind of dedicated environmental research labs or even just space, kind of more ad hoc spaces for us to study and figure things out within our communities, we are not as socio-environmentally resilient. And I don't think it comes up in kind of government planning, for example, thinking about the ways that bi folks are especially precarious during climate crises. Growing up in Texas, I experienced a lot of that with my friends and I. And Washington's certainly not different in that regard. Climate crises affect us all. As we can kind of future-proof for that, we can also build financial and legal support. So I see all of these things as connected in our fight for building our communities to be more supportive and resilient. So as I'm thinking about how do I create this kind of a therapy garden that's responsive, what type of therapy garden is important? Mental health therapy being mentioned was like, okay, that's the clear pathway. So having a physical garden space that therapists could come in and rent for individual and group therapies. And these therapies could be more traditional talk-based therapies, but they could also be horticulturally based because Washington's very outdoorsy, and folks here love that. I love that about living in this state. And have, you know, plant-based gardening type therapies, as well as we're a very nerdy state. We have a lot of really rich culture around fantasy and tech, and tabletop role-play gaming is really rich here. So thinking about having guided RPG therapy sessions as well. So making, I think that kind of blends into this next part, which is having separate days for community centers. So folks who don't maybe, who have a mistrust of the medical system may also feel comfortable coming still and having social programming that has many of this kind of like, okay, I'm interested in this. Maybe I will also now start doing some of these therapy services. They're very, they feel very much the same. And environmental programming could certainly be a part of that community center with research labs and a library space for people to do their own research. But having social programming that, borrowing from the computer science world, thinking about kind of sandbox or open coding, open source programming, having a garden space that is editable and also is something that people can see themselves building their environment, their physical environment, not just their digital environments, but seeing those two things in conversation. I think is a really cool way to move forward. This garden would have to be accessibly designed and have bi-competent staff and therapists, and would need to have community partners who could refer folks here as well as medical providers, so that there is something for people who are not interested in pursuing a kind of medical pathway to services. And this garden could take a whole bunch of other functions on, and I've listed some of them here, but it would be really meaningful at this stage. It's just me right now, and I am trying to get a whole bunch more information about from bi researchers and bi community members across the world to help me kind of weight some of these extra services, because my next step is doing a phase design plan for the garden, and having that kind of input would allow me to phase it so I have a clear ask. So when I go forward and try to approach investors, I'm like, all right, this is what folks want, and I can take that on knowing it's not just me anymore, right? So I have this this QR code here with a short survey. No personal information is collected, and I have my website here where I will be posting kind of the general takeaways of what people are saying, so that you all have access to this this data that I collect as well.
Thank you so much, Carly. That was a great presentation. And again, I'm sure you'll have lots of questions at the end of this. All right, so we'll move on to our third presenter of this panel, Sarah Schmeider, who has been researching LGBTQIA plus online communities since 2018 with a focus on the bisexual experience within these spaces, having written theses on biphobia on Tumblr for her undergraduate degree from the College of William and Mary and master's degree from Brandeis University. She has been continuing her research independently since 2022. Currently, she is a research associate at Harvard Business School and social media volunteer at the Bisexual Research Center by day and internet lurker by night. So welcome, Sarah, and we're happy to hear your presentation. You can go ahead whenever you're ready.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Sarah, and I don't know why my screen is sharing weirdly, but we're going to roll with it, I guess. Oh, there we go. That might be better.
You're all good. We can all see it.
Okay, sweet. Sorry, I'm new computer. So my research is very preliminary. This is like early stage stuff that I'm working on. And it is based off of my master's thesis. So currently it's called Searching for Fakers, Creating Hierarchies in Online Bisexual Spaces Using Inclusionist and Exclusionist Ideologies. And really what I'm looking at is from my master's thesis research, I looked at inclusionist and exclusionist ideologies on Tumblr specifically, and how people within this space delineate who is and is not queer and who is and is not belonging. And I wrapped up that research around 2022. And after that, I was kind of like, okay, I'm done looking at how horribly biphobic people can be online. I'm done. But then I started to realize something as I was going through other queer spaces, that this didn't really go away. And it led to a question I had, is basically, how deep does this go? So what really inspired this continuation of my research is how bisexual people talk about their attraction and position themselves within online spaces. And this really came up in this theme or idea that I kept seeing going around, that is basically bisexuals are attracted to all women and 3 disgusting men, or all women and 2 fictional men, or something about, unfortunately, I am bisexual. It's a very disparaging idea, which reminded me a lot of how people with exclusionist ideologies talk about bisexual people and position them within online spaces. But to back up just a little bit, when I'm talking about inclusionist and exclusionist ideologies, I'm really talking about this like binary ideology. So on one hand, you have inclusionists who believe that the only people who are not LGBTQIA+ are cisgender, heteroromantic heterosexuals. As long as you aren't all 3 of those, there's a place for you somewhere. And that bisexual people are inherently LGBTQIA+, and there is no further proof needed, or it doesn't take dating history into account. And asexual and aromantic people also inherently belong. And on the flip side of this, you have this exclusionist ideology, which is often based in, or more recently, trans-exclusionary radical feminism, or other white supremacist ideologies that tend to believe that even if someone is not completely cisgender, heteroromantic, and heterosexual, that doesn't mean you're LGBTQIA+. That actually doesn't mean much, because there's other vetting or concerns that have to be taken into account before you can say, yes, you are one of us, we want you here. And in that same light, bisexual people in same-sex relationships, or same-sex presenting relationships, are seen to have more rights or more of a say in LGBTQIA community, and deserve the access to resources that those in opposite sex relationships or appearing opposite sex relationships forfeit by getting into those relationships. It's very much a what you do, not what you are. And that is also why asexual and aromantic people are hotly contested about whether they belong. A lot of exclusionist ideologies, especially in the 2010s and especially on Tumblr, very much believed that it was a question. No one knew. They probably just didn't belong. So when I'm talking about these ideologies within bisexual spaces online, I'm really talking about the ways that exclusionist ideologies are played into by bisexual people talking about themselves. So this can look like an assimilation or versus respectability politics divide. So on one hand, there are people who are saying essentially that if you are in straight passing relationships, you should just reject your queerness or your bisexuality in favor of the perceived safety of these relationships. This can be seen a lot as like, well, I'm in a heterosexual presenting relationship, and I know my place is to sit down and shut up and let the actual people who actually experience oppression, the actual queer people, have a say. Anything I say means nothing. I don't talk about my bisexuality. It doesn't need to be mentioned. No one has to worry about this. I've taken a back seat and pretty much said it's irrelevant now that I'm in this relationship or acting this way. On the other hand, you have this like respectability politics that leans towards the exclusionist idea by basically degrading one's own bisexuality and demonizing those who don't conform to ideas of appropriateness. And both of these are playing into the idea that the bisexual community isn't enough. Either the bisexual community is not queer enough, and therefore we have to be queerer, or that the bisexual community wouldn't really know what to do with all of this fluidity and all these differences. And I see a lot of this being portrayed in an idea of like this, like as a bisexual woman, I accept that we're annoying. We suck so bad. Our boyfriends are terrible. And a lot of these ideas are coming up in the like, in a way saying like, oh, yeah, we might be a majority of the LGBTQ community, but we're the worst. We're terrible. We're annoying. We hate ourselves and we deserve to hate ourselves. And whatever other people say about us is more true than what we know about ourselves. Which in that light, as I've been seeing, is sort of this weird duality of rejecting old stereotypes, but creating new ones. So a person is saying like, I'm not like those slutty, greedy, bisexual people who are polyamorous and kinky and all these other traits that I've deemed as negative. I'm not like them. I'm monogamous. I have no connection to like any of those people, nor do I have any connection to the perceived male-centeredness or phallocentrism that some people purport. Like, I'm not one of those. I'm a good one. I'm not like disgusting, essentially. It's very much an internalized biphobia of being like, oh, well, you know, if I just wasn't, I would be good in the eyes of these people who don't like me. And also creating these new stereotypes, because as people are rejecting these old ones in a way to gain validity from people who don't even like them, they're creating these stereotypes of bisexual people are annoying, and they're playing into it, being like, yeah, we're so annoying. We don't shut up about being bisexual. Or that they're just constantly craving validation. And that's like a new stereotype that's been coming up, is like, oh, you just want other people to like you so badly, like you can't just be happy with yourself. And when thinking about this as inclusionist and exclusionist, it's really interesting because the exclusionists are basically moving the goalposts, as one would expect. And people are ignoring the idea that you could just be bisexual, hang around with people who accept bisexuality and be happy. Instead, it's like, I have to prove that I'm a good one, that I'm not one of those. So again, as this research is very much me expanding on previous research, I don't have any like concrete findings, but preliminarily, this is just an appeal to exclusionist ideology that alienates fellow bisexuals, and the hierarchy being created is, I'm not like them, which only further harms bisexual people as a whole, and also harms yourself. And that the push your respectability politics to prove one's validity in exclusionist spaces only presents one valid version of bisexuality. And that valid version is contingent on an idea of purity and not being tainted by anything that is deemed bad or negative within these exclusionist spaces, which are inherently discriminatory and based on bigoted ideologies. And all of that undermines the expansive fluid nature of being bisexual and alienates people from their own sexuality and from people who would genuinely and truly understand them. So that's sort of where I am with this. Again, early stages. But yeah, thank you so much. And I hope you enjoyed this.
Thank you so much, Sarah. That was fascinating. And again, I'm sure you'll have lots of questions at the end of this. So thank you for sharing your findings with us. We're doing really, really great on time. So hopefully we have a lot of time for questions at the end. But before we get to that, we have our last presenter, Marlon Santos, who is a Portuguese and English teacher. He holds a master's degree in applied linguistics and is researching identity performances of bisexual cisgender men and how they are viewed in and out of the LGBTI plus community for his doctoral degree. So everyone welcome Marlon, and feel free to share your screen or start speaking whenever you're ready.
Hi. Hi, everyone. I'm trying to share my screen, but it's a little bit difficult to hear for me. I don't know
Let me
what
see if
happened.
I have you as a co-presenter or a co-host so that you can share it.
Yeah, the problem is me here.
Yeah,
So
okay.
I think now you can,
Yes, I can
yeah.
see your
I think
screen now.
now, all right. So it's a little bit slow here because I'm using another device. Anyway, hi everyone. My name is Maho. I am, as you said, I am a applied linguistics student here in Brazil, and I'm researching bisexuality, male bisexuality, right? And it's erased in LGBTI plus community. So here's just a brief presentation guide for what we are going to see here. I'm trying to be very fast because I have a lot of things to say, and I want to complete it in a very good way. So the point here of my research is a case that happened with a Brazilian economist and researcher, Presley Vasconcelos, right? In March 31st of last year, he shared a post on former Twitter, the X that we don't have anymore here in Brazil, talking about his sexuality and how people used to create their meanings regarding him from stereotypes and labels. Here on the slides, you can see his profile, right? And I also talked to him for him to allow me to use his data. And here's just fragments of this thread, right, that he posted, and it's very long and it has a lot of details about his case, right? But the tweet that most engaged here and that I want to focus on is this one that I translated to you, right? It had around 308 comments, and I'll read it for you. And how many times have I stopped going out with women to avoid strange looks or biased comments, or that I thought other people's views were the truth? My God, how could I allow myself to do that? They put me in a place I don't believe I belong. So this post was very engaged by the LGBTI plus community, but not in a good way. Yeah, as we are going to see. So the theoretical analytical constructs that I use here are from the discourse analysis and linguistic anthropology, right? From these two amazing researchers, the Susan Gall and Judith Irvine. Yeah, the first one here, it's a little bit difficult. I try to illustrate it for you to be better understood. It is the fractal recursivity. It is that it is characterized by the repetition of the same contrast in different scales. So what happens in a macro scale happens in a micro scale. So I'm talking about discourse in general, and we are going to see it exemplified. So we have a whole group here that is prejudice types. Let's simplify like this, right? So racism, misogyny, xenophobia, and LGBT phobia. Inside this LGBT phobia, we have more scales like homophobia, lesbophobia, panphobia, biphobia. And inside the scale of homophobia, for example, we have more scales like a gay man that is read as a man, as manly, so in a standard way. But we also have a gay man who's read as effeminate, that is not in the patterns of society as a man, right? We have cisgender gay men, transsexual gay men. So we have a lot of different configurations of this. Another theoretical analytical construct that we are going to see here is a botanical metaphor. So I think Carley can explain better what is a grafting, but I'm going to use it in a discourse way, right? So a grafting here is basically when we insert a discourse inside another discourse and we transform it. I'm going to explain it better in the analysis. So my question here is, how do discourses within the LGBTI plus community legitimize erasure of bisexuality, right? So here we have the example of the grafting, yeah? So we have a discourse in favor of the LGBTI plus community, but then someone inserts a biphobic discourse on it, and then it becomes a discourse that is in favor of LGBTI plus community, but it is conducted by this biphobic discourse, which is being legitimized, right? And it privileges more monosexual identities like homosexuality and this kind of thing. So I have here some analysis for you to see, right? The comments from Presley's posts. I had to change a little bit of their nicknames, right? But I'm showing you just part of it, right? Just for you to see that they are part of the LGBT plus community. So here is lesbian, so it's a lesbian person. And I'm going to read for you the comment. The guy made a thread to say that he feels oppressed by being with women. Lol. This biphobia thing amuses me too much, because in an attempt to explain its existence, people make evidence that it doesn't exist. Those comments from Gabriel Santana are others that amuse me a lot. Gabriel Santana is another bi man who participated in a reality show here in Brazil. We have two others here that we can see by the emojis that they are using, and some words like pride, for example, that they are from the community too. So the first one, hey fag, you didn't go out because you weren't really interested in women. No one prevents hetero relationships. Come out to the closet and be happy. And the next one, from the same creators of reverse racism, now we have heterophobia. So we can see here that the fractal recursivity that we talked about previously, what happens in a macro level happens in a macro level happens in a micro level. So the LGBT plus community, we already suffer from prejudice, but we have different kinds of prejudices happening inside our own community, right? So in this case, some comments reinforce the erasure of cis bisexual men, and as well as cis bisexual men who do not perform the masculinity expected by the society. So they assume that Presley, they performed a manly identity, right, as a bisexual man. So just to end my presentation, right, we can see that it happened in an online environment, but it also happened in an offline environment. Presley, in one of these posts, he mentioned something that happened to him in a party, right? So I'm going to read it for you. About 2.5 years ago, I met a girl at an LGBT nightclub in Maringá. At the end, we were about to go to my place, and a guy whispered something in her ear. She promptly came back to kiss me and grab my cock to see if it was hard while waiting for the Uber. Immediately, I took her hand away because I already knew what this was about and asked what had happened. She promptly replied, I wanted to see if you were a man. I just replied with, I don't need to prove anything to anyone. Go home with your friends. So as I said, it is my ongoing research, so we have just initial considerations, right? So in this case of Presley Vasconcelos, biphobic discourses seen in the discussion of this thread were grafted, that is, inserted into discourses supposedly in favor of LGBTI plus community. This operation made it possible to legitimize discourses against bisexual people, mixing discourses of non-existent heterophobia to validate the suffering, and only that suffering, of other members of the community, especially the ones that are monosexual. there being then an erasure of the various bisexuality identities as queer identities, and indicating a certain privilege of bisexuality and forgetting all the multi-identifications of a bisexual person. As a follow-up to this presentation, I intend to continue my work, interview with cisgender bisexual men, a group to which I belong, and share more of our experiences. So just for if you are curious to read more about some of my works, and if you want to read Portuguese to learn another language, we have here a blog that I participate in my post-graduation program. I have a similar text talking about the case of Pete Connor from Heartstopper, right? And these are the references. Thank you so much. This is my email if you want to know anything about it. And that's it, guys. Now I need to know how I can stop the screen sharing.
Thank you so much, Marlon. I think you were, oh, okay, you managed to
Yeah,
do it just
okay.
fine. Thank you so much for ending off our panel on such a high note. We did great with time today, so we have 15 minutes for questions or comments or anything that you want to add. So I'm monitoring the chat now, but if anyone wants to ask a question out loud, feel free to raise your hand and, we'll call on you. But we have a question from Theo for Sarah and Marlon to an extent as well. Theo would like to know, in my own research, I found that the reason why French youth identify as bisexual plus or not isn't even tied to negative stereotypes or even definitions, but what is more practical to find a person that they're really attracted to. However, their sample was mostly detached from LGBT plus community and especially online communities. So they're asking if the exclusion and negative stereotypes aren't actually overrepresented in online communities due to how free, borderless, or without consequences it seems. And if you didn't really catch it from my reading it out loud, it's in the chat as well. So Sarah or Marlon, feel free to chime in with any thoughts you might have for Theo.
So my research is mainly focused on online spaces, so I don't really know about like in-person communities, but sorry, I'm still thinking about this. Aren't actually overrepresented in online. I don't know, because part of me doesn't think that they're necessarily I don't see exclusionist ideologies being overrepresented. I just see it as something that continuously gets replicated over and over again. Because from my original research, a lot of it dated back to like same ideas from like the 70s or even further back. So I see it more as like these are constantly being reproduced. Maybe not to the same extent, because I have personally never been in an in-person LGBTQIA plus space, like in person, where someone starts like, questioning if you're really bisexual or not. Yeah, some kind of echo chamber. And I feel like the echo chamber just keeps getting reproduced. And that is also part of the problem, is that either people aren't educated enough to like combat the negative stereotypes, or they're just really trying to make sure that they aren't associated with it. But yeah, I think it's more of an echo chamber and a constant misunderstanding that keeps recurring over and over again. But Marlon might have more to say on that.
Yeah, I think that while we consider online spaces, we think we see that we have how can I say that? I think people are not afraid that much of sharing their thoughts and things, so they have a protection. So I think it's not actually an over what? Sorry, it's because it's actually oversharing, right? So I think we put our identity so much on the internet that we have overshare that it make us more evident in physical, in offline spaces. For example, I don't think I'm talking about me, of course. Yeah, and here in Brazil, that we have a different culture, right? We have a lot of homophobia. It's really, really strong in some spaces here in Rio, where I live, for example. I'm living in a suburb, so it's very strong. So I think that on internet we have it more in evidence, but because on internet we have a kind of protection, I think this is a way for us to see this discussion. But I don't know. I'm thinking about it. It's a very good question.
Thank you to the both of you for addressing that question from Theo. We got one in the chat from John, and it's a question for James. Have you any plans to do similar work to allow comparison with other LGBTQIA plus groups or time series snapshots to compare how they are changing?
The short answer is yes. Right. Imagine not just as an academic who has those kinds of research questions. Imagine you're like with a nonprofit, right? You can try to raise $2 million to do a nationally representative survey. Good luck with that. You can try to hop on like a once every 5 years kind of thing from a census pulse survey, or you can, hopefully, if we automate this kind of ability to take a look, you can do this every couple of months and hop in, and the connections that appear, I didn't supply. They're supplied by people themselves. So from a nonprofit advocacy point of view, it's a great way to get a pulse on what are the burning concerns, the most central concerns from a lot of people who identify as bisexual and are participating, noting that, of course, Reddit and online is not everybody. Second, you can then ask these questions about how do people move? If sexuality is fluid, where do people move over time from community to community? What communities do they move from? Where do they move to? How does bisexuality a part of that? Yeah, so that's the answer is yes, I really would like to do that. Thanks.
Thank you so much, James, for answering that question. Does anybody else have any, like, I see some comments popping up in the chat because we still have 10 minutes left, I believe. So if anybody would like to chime in with either a question or comment on camera, you can keep your camera off if you're not comfortable showing yourself, but if you'd like to speak, please feel free.
I'd like to point out Sam's question in the chat, since I
Yes.
saw that.
Yes,
Yeah,
please
that's
do.
a real concern. And there are ways to think about bots. But two things. First of all, fake conversation actually influences real perception. So whether we call them bots or AI or whatever, they're here. Second is the interesting contrary question you can ask in an interview. To what extent are people bringing their true selves when you're asking them direct questions, or are they telling you the bot version, what they want you to hear, which we know is a tendency? It's unfortunately a reasonable question to ask of any research method.